This podcast is brought to you by Deepbridge Capital LLP. Deepbridge is authorised and regulated by the Financial Conduct Authority. Please note that investments discussed are both illiquid and high risk and won't be suitable for all investors and should be considered as part of a diversified portfolio. The content of this podcast should not be construed as financial or taxation advice. We recommend investors seek appropriate professional financial advice. Any views expressed may no longer be current and may have already been acted upon. Welcome to this Deepbridge Discovery Podcast. My name's Andrew Aldridge. The purpose of this podcast is to bring to life the people and the companies behind what we do here at Deepbridge. In this episode, I'm delighted to be joined by Dr. Stuart Hannah, who's CEO of Microplate Dx, a portfolio company within the Deepbridge Life Sciences, SCIS and EIS funds. So hi Stuart, great to have you on the podcast.
Hi Andrew, great to be here. Thanks for the invite.
No, great. So I guess, we always kind of like to start at the beginning with these podcasts. So I guess first and foremost for our audience, can you tell us a bit about how Microplate Dx came to be and your background and a bit about the team?
Of course, thanks Andrew. So going right back to the beginning, I guess, we are a University of Strathclyde spin-out company, so based in Glasgow. And really the project, the Microplate project, I guess, as it was in the beginning, started back sort of 2017, 2018.
Okay.
And at that stage, it was a collaboration between myself and another couple of University of Strathclyde academics, Professor Damien Corrigan, who's now our CTO, and Professor Paul Hoskisson, who's our CSO. And really kind of got together and set out to try to really improve the diagnostic landscape for antimicrobial resistance, because the current kind of standard processes take so long to return a result, namely days, huge issues with respect to misprescribing of antibiotics, etc. So we were really trying to speed up that whole process and bring, crucially, cost-effective but rapid diagnostics to the point of care so patients can actually walk away with the right antibiotic when they first present, which avoids all these huge downstream complications and healthcare effects. But really what kicked it all off, I guess, was, back in 2017, so Damien and Paul received a prestigious Longitude Prize Discovery Award. Okay. So Longitude Prize was set up by the UK government a number of years ago, really looking at trying to, develop a technology at that stage to tackle antimicrobial resistance, or AMR. And a number of parties put forward ideas. They got a Discovery Award, and that kick-started the work on Microplate at Strathclyde. Yep. I then joined as the lead researcher on that project back in August 2018. And essentially, we worked as a team to develop this technology. And again, at that stage, very academic project where we're, bringing our respective expertise, from myself in electronic and electrical engineering, from Damien's point of view in electrochemistry and biosensor development, and from Paul's perspective in molecular microbiology. And really hitting the sweet spot at that stage of trying to come up with this microbiology-based sensor test. And we found after about 9 to 12 months of development that actually the proof of concept work we'd been doing, whereby we were looking to essentially detect differences between the common hospital-acquired infection, Staphylococcus aureus, a major bacterial infection, and its drug-resistant strain, MRSA. We could detect these differences and antibiotic killing within about 45 minutes or so, which was really promising considering the gold standard technology takes days.
I was going to say so that in itself, as a non-academic, that sounds like a massive increase in kind of what the standard was previously.
Absolutely, massive. Bringing that down from days to minutes is really what it's all about. So at that stage, from our point of view, we were still thinking of it academically. We thought we need to publish this, we need to get this out there. Yep. But at that stage, actually, the university's commercialization team got involved and said, let's just put the brakes on a little bit. I think there's something here. Let's discuss, commercial potential. Can we maybe put in an invention disclosure, file a patent? And, at that stage, we're going, okay.
Sounds good. Yeah,
let's do that. We didn't really know where that could go, but let's give it a go. So we filed that patent back in 2019. And then almost immediately off the back of that, we had a paper that was then ready to go, and we went ahead and published those findings. But at that stage, and we didn't realize the implications this would have, but we got a lot of media attention actually off the back of that sort of proof of concept work that we'd done. And it was picked up not just in the UK, but actually international press picked that up as well. And we found ourselves suddenly thrown into the deep end where we're giving interviews on the BBC, the local news channels came in, filmed a piece, and it really, it was obviously outside our comfort zone, but it was quite invigorating actually, to seeing the sort of impact that you could have with this. And it made us realise, I think, as a team, where this could go.
And I guess that's kind of a validation in itself of what you're doing. There's a market, there's a desire, there's a need for this, because you wouldn't have that kind of interest unless there was. And particularly, I guess, MRSA over the last, God knows how many years has been such a kind of a headline grabber, that I guess that's kind of where the interest came from.
That's absolutely right. So from a technical point of view, the validation, you're absolutely right, was there, and people knew about the public health threat with, as you say, MRSA, and there's some other fungal infections now that are starting to come to the fore here. But MRSA has always been there, but just that emerging, and now this repeated drug resistance behind organisms like Staph aureus and others within that hospital environment. I think that's where the interest came from. But from then, I guess it then took on a bit more of a commercial angle. So the technical validation was there. We got nice proof of concept data. Obviously, that was continuing under the guise of a university at that stage. But we then started to explore other avenues in which we could, let's have a look at the commercial potential of this. So, we got involved a lot with Scottish Enterprise at that stage. Went through 2 rounds of their high growth spin-out program, which was excellent because, again, it enabled that technical development to continue. But it also enabled myself to start building that commercial case alongside the help of others, get a commercial champion involved, who then later became our chair, Dr. Poonam Malik. So that was really a fantastic relationship building exercise there.
And I guess for you, that move from academia into the commercial world, you need that support around you to guide you, and I guess it's kind of a whole new learning curve for you, I guess, to some degree.
Huge learning curve, very exciting learning curve. But it was a huge learning curve, and I mean, certainly couldn't have done it without the support of the network. So, in addition to the Scottish Enterprise support, we went through Innovate UK's iCure programme to really look at the market potential there. I went through the Royal Society of Edinburgh's Enterprise Fellowship programme, which, again, 12-month dedicated programme, really gave me the opportunity to get out of the lab, as it were, and really explore that commercial potential and learn all these aspects to really grow the business, essentially. So, no, you're absolutely right. It's all these support mechanisms were absolutely crucial to then, being able to spin this out ultimately and see where the potential lay with this technology then going forward. Absolutely.
But so you've mentioned your CSO and your CTO. Are there any other kind of team members around you that are part of the core team and driving this forward?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's 4 of us as co-founders of the business. So in addition to myself and Damien and Paul as the CTO and CSO, Dr. Poonam Malik is involved as our co-founder and chair. Poonam's got a wealth of experience across the sort of an entrepreneurial strategy type role, as I see it. Hugely influential. Is head of investments at the University of Strathclyde. Sits on a number of boards as well, like Scottish Enterprise, for instance. So, she's brought a lot of value to the team there from that commercial angle. We've also got Professor Andy Porter as our non-exec director. We appointed him just as we were spinning out the business. And again, Andy's given us a lot of huge value there. And again, from the R&D team as well, the boots on the ground in the lab doing the work. We've got a fantastic team around us there, and that's continuing to evolve and grow. And we're in that space of growing that team at the moment. So yeah, it's been a huge support for me on a personal level, but from the business point of view, couldn't do it without these guys.
So do you want to tell us a bit more about kind of your background of what research and things you've been your academic background prior to Microplate Dx then?
Yeah, no, absolutely, Andrew. So my background is in electronic and electrical engineering, actually. Got an undergraduate and PhD from Strathclyde.
So you've not moved far then. That's good.
There was a brief interlude when I went. I did some postdoc work in the south of France.
Okay, good.
But no,
you went to get some sun for a bit. Yeah.
Absolutely. But no, my calling obviously was back in Glasgow. So, but yeah, the PhD itself was in actually organic electronics. So developing what they called essentially stretchable, flexible type electronic type systems. Okay. So instead of using I'm getting too technical, but I guess instead of using say silicon based sort of semiconductor materials, the idea was to use sort of carbon-based organic type materials that meant you could use much lower processing temperatures, which meant you could essentially put electronics onto plastics or even paper to come up with really low cost, but crucially kind of bendy, flexible sort of sensors. So I was trying to embed these onto things for like electronic skin purposes, for instance, for robotics. So all that sort of stuff, and I know there's a number of companies now looking at that sort of for smartphone use, which is really quite interesting, seeing it now actually being applied. But crucially, I think my area of expertise from the PhD and then into postdoctoral work in France was around that microfabrication, the sensor development side of things, and really having that strong aspect. So that was really useful for them bringing that back to Microplate when I rejoined Strathclyde, admittedly biomedical engineering at that point, not electronic and electrical, but still engineering.
Yep, very good.
But certainly bringing that sort of sensor and microfabrication experience to the fore was, I think, crucial in terms of just developing that initial product, certainly. But I've always had an interest, I think, in that microfabrication, sensor development, but the sort of diagnostics and health tech side of things certainly came a little bit laterally towards some of that postdoc experience, first of all, but then really sort of picked up as I rejoined Strathclyde to do some of that work. And then the interest in commercialization kind of fed off the back of that. So again, going back to that previous point, where we saw the traction and the potential of the technology when it went through that media attention, made me realize that actually the commercial piece is really valuable here, and the impact that ultimately the technology could have. And that sort of has then piqued my interest in going forward in terms of commercializing that.
I guess that's kind of a light bulb moment, isn't it? When I guess as an academic, you can see the science, you understand why the science works, but then it's that kind of having that light bulb moment of going, oh, there is a commercial purpose for this, and we can actually see where this would work in isolation rather than being part of a wider R&D kind of project.
So true. It's so true. And I think that really then started to focus our mind a little bit on, because we knew we had a platform capability with this technology, but again, and that's maybe one of the challenges, but it's a blessing and a curse, because actually you can then go, there is a huge potential here, there is a real market need here, where do we want to focus first, where do we get that initial traction, then we can look to maybe expand that out into some of these other areas. But the two have to go hand in hand. The technology needs to be there, but also there needs to be a customer for this at the end of the day, and that needs to be there. And if you can see that, and certainly I think that's where healthcare is hugely beneficial in one respect, because the sort of clinical impact is always what sort of drives that development work. So again, you can get ready access to the clinicians, the sort of patients, and that really helps validate what you're doing.
You can almost see the immediate benefits of it. It's science, so A plus B equals C kind of thing. It's that. Whereas I guess in other technologies, in other consumer products, etc., it is about market forces and market demand, etc. It's a little bit more woolly. Whereas you guys, if you've proved the concept and it works, and you can see how that has a direct impact onto healthcare systems, etc., then you can see that kind of pathway to where you want to get to, I guess.
That's absolutely right. No, absolutely right, Andrew. I think it's the customer is there, the need is there. It's about, and yes, okay, you need to build that data as you're going, and work with key opinion leaders, work with clinicians to really help refine and I guess fine-tune that offering to make sure that it fits within the care pathway, because that's another thing you need to look at. It's from our point of view, bringing it down from days to minutes, absolutely fantastic, but where is that going to fit within the existing structure? And some of these systems are relatively rigid, so it's making sure that if the clinical need is there, that's great, but actually how does it fit in within that overall pathway? So
how do you disrupt that, and how do you make sure it's adopted? And absolutely, and that's
absolutely.
I think that's often overlooked as well. Certainly when we work with medical companies, etc., or pharma companies, it is understanding that route of disruption. How are you going to disrupt that market? Because yes, there might be an obvious reason to use your product, but ultimately you've got to still disrupt the current usage and adoption of clinicians. So it's an interesting kind of approach you have to go through. So what have been the key milestones today then? You mentioned awards and things, but kind of what have been the key milestones today?
I think really growing that team, off the back of incubating in the university, getting that strong founding team together, getting the Andy involved as a non-exec, and then from that point being able to raise substantial pre-seed funding, and closing seed funding rounds now as well, and that's really helped propel us forward, I think. So enabled us to form that license agreement with the university, spin out entirely, grow that really strong team, and continue to push on with the technical development towards that that first product area we're looking at for urinary tract infections specifically. I think, scaling the team to now sort of 10 of us involved from different aspects, in terms of R&D, management, strategic advisory type roles, and really driving forward a number of developments. As I say, crucially technically, with some of that work we've been doing on our now regulatory compliant system, doing some preclinical evaluation testing with the NHS, and again, that's been hugely valuable in terms of building that data set. But again, proving the validation of the technology and the need there. But also, going back to some of those other aspects we touched on there, being cognizant of the fact that there are other markets for this. This is a global issue. Antimicrobial resistance. It's great to have the network on our doorstep to be able to do some of this testing, but equally need to be looking at places like the US, Europe, even low and middle income countries if we really want to get a handle on antimicrobial resistance as a global health threat. So doing quite a lot of that sort of early validation there to understand the markets.
It's been regularly flagged by the WHO as being a major challenge facing the health of the world. So I guess it certainly isn't just a UK issue. It is an international, and being flagged by the WHO shows that the enormity of the challenge being faced, and the importance of the work you're doing, I guess.
Absolutely right. So the WHO have been a fantastic push towards, I guess, individual countries recognising the need to implement some policies now, essentially, and some strategies to try to address this. So they have been very valuable, and I think that's one of the things about antimicrobial resistance. It's always been there, but it's now getting quite a bit of traction and recognition, crucially from agencies like the WHO, from governments, but individuals. I think the public have got a far greater awareness now, perhaps off the back of COVID, for instance, but just the need for diagnostics in general, and that's been really helpful actually in terms of selling the story from our point of view too. So it's great to see, not before time I may have had, but it's great to see some traction happening.
And for a layperson like myself, this is why I do these podcasts. So it's always at a layperson's level. So this is important. But just tell us a bit more about kind of antimicrobial resistance and why it's becoming more and more of a challenge and a threat, if you like.
Absolutely. So essentially, antimicrobial resistance, or kind of AMR, it really boils down to bacteria, viruses, fungi, parasites, these sort of pathogens, basically evolving, changing over time, and no longer responding to medicines which used to be used to treat them. So that emerging resistance, essentially, that careful evolution of these parasites over time really makes the infections in longer term far harder to treat, because you're losing the ability to treat them with medicines and antibiotics, for instance, that once used to be effective. So that then, at a sort of societal level, then increase the risk of disease spreading, severe illness, and ultimately death, unfortunately, in a number of circumstances. And really, ever since antibiotics were first discovered and really approved for clinical use, AMR has been there and started to grow. And I think that is one of the challenges a little bit. It's kind of known as the silent pandemic. It's not like COVID-19, for instance, where it was upon us almost overnight and we had to do something about it. AMR has always been continuing to grow. So it has been gradually getting worse for decades. And going back to that earlier point, that is one of the challenges to get governments and health agencies globally to start taking that immediate action. It's at what point do we want to step in and start to do something about this, because it has been sort of slowly evolving. But really, from our perspective, one of the challenges behind AMR is really that clinical challenge at the moment, because there are no, regulatory approved ways to be able to rapidly tell whether an antibiotic is going to be effective. Because the current sort of gold standard processes for what they call antibiotic susceptibility testing, really that process of choosing which antibiotic is best for a patient, because that takes a minimum of 2 days, sometimes even longer for some of the bloodstream infections. That can take up to a week in some circumstances. When a doctor has got a patient in front of them with a suspected infection, they end up prescribing empirically. So essentially taking a best guess from, antibiotic prescribing guidelines, but they're still having to take a guess as to which antibiotic may be useful. And they end up taking a bit of a punt and going for a broader spectrum antibiotic in the hope that it's then going to clear up that infection. But when you overuse and misuse some of these broad spectrums, it can then lead to exacerbating the issue of of resistance. So it's important to try and really get that narrower, more targeted antibiotic to the patient more quickly. But of course, when faced with that choice of taking a choice, they will go broad over narrow, which is where that technology then comes in. But just to put some figures on that for you. So for instance, for our first application area, looking at urinary tract infections, one of the first line antibiotics that's been used for decades now to treat UTIs is something called trimethoprim.
Okay.
We're now seeing trimethoprim resistance widely, and this is within the UK, where resistance actually isn't as high as some other countries, widely at 33 to about 50%. So that's 1 in 2, 1 in 3 patients, sort of best case, that will turn up, get given trimethoprim, and it just won't clear up for UTI. They'll then need to come back and get another one. So that's where that real need is, to make sure you get the right one. And I think what's quite stark, even with say UTIs, but 1 in 4 sepsis cases can be linked back to a poorly treated UTI. So it's really important to make sure you get that right treatment straight away.
Yeah,
absolutely. And the number of deaths is clear now, because that's obviously a key metric that's mapped. And at the moment, there's already close to 1.3 million global annual deaths attributed to these drug-resistant infections where they just aren't able to treat. And the estimate actually by 2050 it could reach 10 million unless serious interventions start to take place. So, it's time, as you say, time is absolutely of the essence.
Absolutely. And I guess, and as you alluded to before, I guess, layperson knowledge. Yeah, I like layperson term. It's me. It sums me up. Layperson knowledge of kind of how drugs work, etc., has been, I guess, completely gone above anything previous because of the COVID-19 pandemic. People understood that drugs change and viruses and things change, etc., and evolve, and actually that is exactly what you're dealing with, but on a larger scale, because it's not just one virus, it's not just one element, it's across the board with all antibiotics and what's going on there. So I guess is that another reason why the press interest over the last couple of years has been so interesting? What you're doing, do you think that's linked?
I think there's a massive link between COVID-19. You're absolutely right. That evolution of the virus and what we're doing, and you're absolutely right. The AMR kind of encompasses the bacterial side, the fungal side, all of these different elements. And as you say, it's not just one virus, or one pathogen. There's a number of these that are showing emerging resistance. So I think that has certainly helped. But I also think the way we're looking to tackle it has helped as well, because there's a number of ways you can try to skin the cat on AMR. There's companies out there trying to develop new antibiotics, for instance, which has its own inherent challenges in the fact that it's hugely capital intensive. There's been no new antibiotic classes brought onto the market in about 30 years or so, just because of some of the challenges there and some of the pharmaceutical companies' sort of incentives to do so. But that is one aspect to it. There's also the vaccine development that we saw going down with COVID-19 to a degree. But then there's the diagnostic side, which everybody had experience of at some point through PCR testing or lateral flow testing, for instance, for COVID. And it's not dissimilar in that respect, and it's made our lives in some respects a lot easier, when talking to investors and to talking to stakeholders, and that wider sort of public awareness in terms of what we're doing has certainly been helped by COVID. And I think the public recognise the need for useful diagnostic tools that can help decide whether they actually need that treatment or then how to interpret that current situation and where to then go with that. If it's a choice between turning up and getting as I mentioned, a drug that is only effective maybe 1 out of 3, 1 out of 2 times, or actually let's do a test, let's find out, A, do you have that infection, and B, then how do we treat it appropriately? It's a no-brainer. So I think, that public awareness of things like even sensitivity, specificity, these are words that just were not used going back 3 years, but now
common parlance,
so widely known.
Absolutely. So what have so lots of opportunities, lots of things you've been working on, lots of milestones to date, but what have been the kind of challenges or barriers or that you faced kind of along the way? Because nothing's ever plain sailing. What have you faced?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think we touched on one of these already, but again, I'll reiterate, is that sort of clinical awareness, I suppose, and that sort of wider public awareness of AMR. And I certainly think that is growing, and COVID's helped there. But I think that understanding of the need to almost act now, and let's do something about this now. Let's not kick the can down the road any further when it comes to antimicrobial resistance, I think. And that is, as I touched on, that sort of idea of the silent pandemic, and it's always been there. But, AMR, by 2050, if that 10 million figure comes to pass, it would kill more than cancer and diabetes combined. It's a huge existential threat facing humanity.
Particularly when you think, particularly when you think about the levels of investment into cancer treatments, etc., and things like that. So cancer survival rates are going up. So this is the next big challenge, I guess.
Absolutely, no, couldn't agree more. And I think we are starting to see the tide turn, which is great. And I think more can always be done there. But I think it's really encouraging to see latterly some of the developments in this space. But I think that's one of the challenges. Convincing governments, funding agencies, what have you, to do something about this now, and let's get over that initial inertia. It's time to really get moving on that. I think as well, from the sort of platform and our technology specifically point of view, this is a platform that we're developing here. Yep. So whilst we're starting off with urinary tract infections after doing some pretty focused market validation and clinical understanding work, there are a number of other opportunities there. We can move into bloodstream infections, fungal infections. Yep. There's a number of different areas we can go here. And actually, as a team, trying to prioritize, again, bandwidth, in an ideal world, we'd do all of these, multiple angles in parallel and and go for it. But you need to be cognizant of that fact that let's look at what we can do. Where's the low-hanging fruit to a degree? What's the beachhead opportunity? And for us, that is urinary tract infections. But versus being mindful of there are other opportunities here. Where can we then maybe take this technology? So again, that is a challenge to just sort that in our heads and sort of see, look, where do we want to go with this in time? What makes the most sense from a technical point of view, a clinical point of view, but also the commercial imperative there as well. So all of them need to sort of marry up. I think, again, a final maybe one would be, I guess, a relatively slow route to market for a technology like this. Now, obviously in life sciences, there is a little bit of a slower return for investors and things like that because of the need to go through the regulatory approvals, the clinical trials and that sort of thing. And, some investors may see that as a slight barrier to that return, for instance, within, that sort of more traditional kind of few-year time frame. For instance, it might just take slightly longer, although, of course, the sort of risk is then married up by that higher reward potential. And I think that's something that Deepbridge understands a lot in terms of life sciences portfolio there, which is fantastic.
No, I think you're absolutely right on that, and I think that's why we run two EIS funds, one tech and one life sciences, specifically because life sciences companies do perform and not perform but behave differently to other kind of companies, and I think people investing in life sciences through our fund or through other funds out there understand that, and I guess we're seeing certainly more and more capital coming into the life sciences sector as the wider world, whether that be private equity, whether that be private investors, become more and more savvy in terms of what to expect from life science investment. So I'm hoping that's longer term is good news for you and your goals and ambitions.
Absolutely. No, it's fantastic to hear that, Andrew, and I think you're absolutely right. And whilst things can take a little bit longer, there is a little element of risk in that respect. Certainly the reward at the other end of that need is such that I think it certainly makes the appetite still to be strong there. So I think that's just something we need to be mindful of as we're sort of pitching this around that kind of expectation in terms of route to market side. But that potential big win on the other side, and where we can then crucially go with the platform capability, certainly outweighs those challenges, I feel.
So what are your next steps, next goals? Kind of what's the short, medium term look like?
I think certainly upon closure of this kind of current kind of fundraise at the moment, really scaling the sort of R&D management operational teams quite considerably, really increasing the bandwidth that we've got as part of the team. That's a really exciting sort of phase for us actually at the moment. On the sort of technical front, certainly scaling up the production of the minimum viable product for the UTI system, the cartridges, the instrumentation, and again, going through more sort of preclinical evaluation studies with our NHS partners. Okay. Then looking, I guess, further afield, really further developing some of the work we've been doing in other markets, the US and Europe in particular, just making sure we're aligning closely with the regulatory and ultimately adoption strategies in these markets, and starting to scale up some of that route to market piece across those geographies again, which I think we've identified some real kind of beachhead opportunities there.
In terms of kind of expectations, you might not have necessarily gone into this in much details yet, but do you expect somewhere like the US to be an easier market to get into rather than the beast that is the NHS? Because in the US you've got competitive kind of healthcare services.
I think it certainly could be. Mm-hmm. I think at the moment we're keeping all options open, which I think is a sensible thing to do. We're engaging engaging locally. We've got some fantastic NHS partners, and we're working with a number of their, clinical and innovation type bodies. But I'd be lying if I said we weren't looking at the US market and even some of the European market opportunities there as well, but actually there might be potentially some easier wins and early sort of first entry points for us. It is a completely different healthcare system there. The clinical need will always come out sort of on top when it comes to the US, and I think that's part of our strategy at the moment. Over the last few months, we've engaging with the regulatory body there, the FDA, to understand their requirements, and that's been hugely valuable in terms of informing our validation strategies and the clinical testing strategies going forward. But crucially, that reimbursement piece, and that's quite a distinction between, I guess, what we do in the US compared to within the UK, and understanding where we would fit within that care pathway, but also what is the willingness to ultimately pay for the technology, and that feeds into the commercial piece, which again is important in the NHS. But if you can conquer that bit, then actually it's usually far easier, and there's certainly good stories that you can point to that have shown that is a nice route to go down. But, from my point of view, keeping all the options open, and, from our point of view, we'd love to be able to tap into the NHS. It's a local market. We've been doing so much validation work with them. Hopefully that can also become a reality in time too.
Absolutely. And, it's... as a user of the NHS, we want the NHS to be utilising the best products and the best kind of tools to their hands. So that makes perfect sense. Just kind of quickly going back, I'm conscious of time, but just kind of going back, you talked initially, we talked about your kind of transition from academia into the commercial world, and you touched on you're working with likes of Scottish Enterprise, Innovate UK, etc. Kind of how's that ecosystem been to support you? Has that been kind of invaluable, and kind of what kind of support has been provided throughout kind of whether that be other funders, ourselves, etc. What does that kind of ecosystem look like to you, and how invaluable has that been to you?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and I think the early stage ecosystem in particular in the UK has been incredibly beneficial to us. Actually, there was a number of opportunities available to us while we're still even incubating within the university. So I've touched on Scottish Enterprise, that high growth spin out program, but that really did give us a solid 18 months to get us, get our story straight, advance the technology, increase the sort of technology readiness levels, but also get that commercial picture, at front and center of our mind and grow the team. So that was hugely beneficial. But alongside things like, Innovate's iCure program to really understand the market opportunities there. The Royal Society of Edinburgh's Enterprise Fellowship program on a personal level for me, massively beneficial in terms of really making that leap from the sort of academic researcher into the commercial lead for Microplate Dx. A few others, I mentioned certainly through the University of Edinburgh, we've done some work with them as well, the EIE program, the Investor Readiness program, again, really, really beneficial for us. Some of the competitions locally in Scotland, like Converge Challenge, came away as runner-up there, and then came away as winner of Scottish Edge. Again, really supportive ecosystems, really useful in terms of the cash prize, but also some of the business support that goes alongside that. And, some of the other bits and pieces of, things like state aid support we've had through people like CPI. They've got a Scout program we were able to take advantage of. There was a regulatory health trip program that gave us a huge amount of funding actually to start doing quite a lot of work on the regulatory piece, which was really beneficial. Again, pointing to Edinburgh University, we were on recently just completed their 6-month AI accelerator program, because there's a huge aspect of the data and some of the artificial intelligence behind our diagnostic as well. So that was really beneficial for us in terms of really scaling that too. So, and then obviously when it came to the pre-seed funding, Deepbridge coming in, which was just fantastic through the SEIS and EIS funding mechanisms, and the university support from Strathclyde as well, coming in there to support and co-invest alongside Deepbridge has just been hugely beneficial. So no, I would say the UK ecosystem is thriving in that respect at that early stage, and from our point of view, long may that sort of continue as we continue to scale the business, and hopefully keep alive a number of the opportunities that once were there sort of prior to Brexit, and hopefully we'll see coming out the other side of that still a strong ecosystem that's supportive to early stage businesses.
That's certainly what we're seeing as well, and I think that's always good to hear from people who've been there on the journey themselves, because we maybe have a helicopter view over it, but to actually see people who have gone through that. So I guess kind of just following on from that, if you're speaking to an entrepreneur or a founder kind of who's looking to kind of go through the process you've been through, but what would be your advice, or what would be your kind of your advice to them, and Yeah, particularly in the life sciences and R&D sector.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting question. I mean, I'd certainly say go for it. I think it's hugely rewarding. And I think there's so much potential out there, particularly in this sort of life sciences space. And where that need is so apparent, I think it's a really exciting space and time to be doing some of this work. I think patience is absolutely key. I think expectations of getting stuff done overnight, when you're dealing with, as I say, things like the NHS and some of the regulatory approvals, you need to be patient. This is a long-term ambition. You get the wins along the way, but this, it's a longer-term sort of engagement to some of this. But I think equally, the sort of stage that we're at, and we went through quite a bit of this, was really carefully as a team mapping out where our strengths lie. Yep. What makes sense for us as Microplate DX to really focus our time on versus what makes sense to maybe outsource to others that have been there before working, so choosing partners in that respect, partners being a whole sort of ecosystem of people you might want to work with, being, and doing that carefully because, R&D intensive businesses, certainly for us, it's about the sort of IP generation. It's about the new ideas, fresh ideas, being sort of innovative in that respect. So we realise that's where the strengths lie, and then working with, outsourced manufacturing, regulatory people that can then bring that whole package together. So I think that's useful, just, being mindful of where the strengths are and what you might want to do externally. I think as well, with that view in mind of that sort of knowledge-intensive piece, filing IP, having a strong patent portfolio, for instance, behind you is really, really important. If it then comes to the sort of route to market, but then the scaling, even from the investment angle, is going to be something that does come up, certainly in this space, to make sure that people don't snatch those ideas.
And it's like, when you're raising funds as well, it's important to have that protection for investors, because ultimately that's what they're investing in.
Yeah. So true. No, absolutely. So it's really, really important for investors. But I think, alongside that as well is go for different grant opportunities. Look at what opportunities lie out there to sort of can come in alongside some of that equity investment. For instance, Innovate UK, for instance, I point to massive number of grant opportunities available there, things like R&D tax credits. So explore all of these avenues, I think, to sort of supplement some of that investment. But I think overall, innovation will take time. I think surrounding yourself with good people, building a strong team, and ensuring that everyone within the organisation, believes in that mission and knows the sort of the reason for being essentially of the business, and that success will then come in time.
Absolutely, and I think again, our people who are on the podcast will be delighted to know that I have nothing to do with investment decision making in Deepbridge, and that is rightly so. But when I see companies, and particularly when I saw Microplate DX, there's certain things that we always talk to entrepreneurs and founders about, and you kind of ticked all of those boxes in terms of surrounding yourself by great people. That's first and foremost. You've got to have the right people that you can rely on. The IP piece, etc. Those hopefully come sense. But the key thing which you've certainly done in abundance is going after that grant funding, giving yourself that runway, giving yourself that cash to actually do what you need to do without having to take the first offer on the table, etc. That's really impressive what you've done there, and that's something which certainly when I was looking at Microplate for the first time, it was really impressive to see that you've kind of gone through those cycles with Innovate UK, Scottish Enterprise, etc., and all the other ones you mentioned, because that's vital, and there is so much funding out there for startups and for early stage companies, particularly in innovative spaces like yourselves.
You're absolutely right. No, thank you for that, Andrew. No, I appreciate that. I think there is, and it's that balance, isn't it? It's trying to be sensible. There is a trade-off, I suppose, in a respect. Sometimes there's a lot of heavy lifting to be done, but if you can get one of these grants, it can extend the runway, it can extend your ability to then move into other areas, accelerate development far more quickly. So it's worth doing it.
And they can extend your network as well, and the people around you, and that support network, which in itself invaluable. Anyway, I'm conscious of time, Stuart. I mean, this is I could chat to you all day. So away from the office, then we always like to bring a bit of personality to these podcasts, just so people realise that that we are all normal human beings. So away from managing and running a fast-paced scale-up business, which I can imagine takes a majority of the time. But what are your personal interests away from the office, from the lab?
Yeah, I mean, whenever I can, I like to get out walking, in the countryside near where I stay and sort of Bishopston area and Renfrewshire. But, getting up to the Highlands, only a couple of hours away, we've got some fantastic walks on our doorstep here in Scotland. We are blessed with beautiful scenery and fresh air and countryside. So, try and do that as much as possible. Just get away. It's incredible what a couple of days in the fresh air and walking can do. And I find usually the best ideas, as a bit of a
Absolutely.
cliche, the best ideas do come to your mind when you actually do just take a bit of time to chill and, and experience that. So that's a big one for me. And also like playing golf. I'm not particularly great at it, I have to admit, but it's always good to hack your way around a course.
Nobody has ever come on this podcast and said they're good at golf. So yeah, that's it.
Good to hear.
No, that's good. That's good. So then the question we ask all of our guests on the Deepbridge Discovery podcast is about the Deepbridge dinner party. So if you could invite 3 guests to the Deepbridge dinner party, dead or alive, no friends or family, because we don't want to offend anybody. So, but who would those 3 guests be and why?
Fantastic question. So, Nikola Tesla would be probably number one. I think a real motivation for my sort of initial interest in electronics and in engineering, and really, what an incredible human mind. So I think that's certainly be one.
Absolutely.
I would have said David Bowie. From a music point of view, back catalogue, absolutely incredible. Love his stuff. Even if his personality is not up to much, I guess we can just stick one of his records on and just enjoy that while we're eating. So that's certainly something.
He had a dry sense of humour, so that would be quite interesting.
Should be quite good. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Thirdly, I really like Gordon Ramsay. And I think that ties in nicely with the dinner party piece, because, he can always cook the meal and then he can sit down. But I quite like some of his programmes and some of his... not always my attitude to business, but certainly do quite like...
That was going to be my question. Is that how you deal with your team members? Is that...
Well, they have their moments, but yeah. But no, I think those 3 can make for certainly quite an interesting meal, that's for sure. I
was going to say he'd have to be cooking, so I don't think you'd get any chefs that would want him to be as a guest. So he'd have to be in the kitchen. But no, that interesting 3. I think Tesla is I guess is kind of the kind of the starting point for electronics and what have you. So I guess that's absolutely natural, and is kind of makes perfect sense, which is brilliant. Look, Stuart, again, I could talk to you for hours, so thank you very much for your time. I'm conscious that you need to go back and run a business, so I'll leave you in peace. But no, really appreciate your time, and thank you for joining us, and I look forward to catching up with you soon.
Fantastic. No, thank you again, Andrew. I really appreciate the opportunity. Great to chat.
Thank you for joining us. If you have any topics you'd like covering in future podcasts, then please email us at discovery@deepbridgecapital.com. This podcast was brought to you by Deepbridge Capital LLP. Deepbridge is authorised and regulated by the Financial Conduct Authority. Please note that investments discussed are both illiquid and high risk and won't be suitable for all investors and should be considered as part of a diversified portfolio. The content of this podcast should not be construed as financial or taxation advice. We recommend investors seek appropriate professional financial advice. Any views expressed may no longer be current and may have already been acted upon.